Beth Zier was an Oak Grove student from 1973 to 75. A few years after graduating from college, Beth returned to Oak Grove to teach girls physical education and coach various sports in the dark. Coached various sports from January 82 to 84. She is now a professional counselor and has her own private practice for counseling with women. Beth lives in Puyallup, Washington, with her husband, and they have 2 grown sons, both in their 20s. She and her family are here to celebrate their mom's 100th birthday, which is today. Beth is a survivor of both a near-fatal car accident and breast cancer. Despite those challenges of life's experience, Beth recognizes them as being part of God's plan for her life. Today she'll be sharing with us about how she has seen that plan unfold in her life. One of Beth's sons, Jacob, is also here today. He provides witness to Christ through the ministry of Christian rap music. He'll be performing one of his songs for us. Before we hear from Beth and Jacob, we'll listen to a song by Sidewalk Prophets called Help Me Find It.
Now the song that we just listened to, Help Me Find It, relates to knowing God's will or His plan for our lives, asking Him how to find it and trusting Him to guide us. The Bible promises that God's plan is the best plan. In Psalm 32:8, it says that I will guide you along the best pathway for your life. Also in Jeremiah 29:11, it states, For I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord. They are plans for good and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. Additionally, Proverbs 16:9 says, A man's heart plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps. So what are your plans, your hopes, your dreams, your goals? Even for this school year ahead, what is it that you want to accomplish academically, athletically, musically, or whatever? What are your hopes and expectations? Those of you that are seniors, no doubt you're already giving some thought to next year and whether you'll be going on to school or not, and if you are, where you might be going and what you'll be studying. When I was here, I was involved in both girls basketball and track. My main interest was in basketball. In fact, I had very high hopes of being a varsity player for Pacific Lutheran University when I went to college there in Tacoma, Washington. I tuned out for the basketball team as a freshman, and I didn't make the team. Again, as a sophomore, I didn't make the team. Even as a junior, I did not make the team. Now, I did play junior varsity basketball, but that's not what I had planned on. That was not my hope. Also, I tuned out for the cross-country running team in the fall, as well as track in the spring, but also ran during the off-seasons, and so I was beginning to run year-round. And since I was running year-round, I was also beginning to experience some success with my running. There was a desired change from being a very good basketball player to being a very competitive long-distance runner. And I see that as part of God's plan for my life. See, running as much as I had, it helped me to develop both my level of fitness and also my competitive spirit, which prepared me for what I was to face on the 14th of January, 1980. And it was then that I began running in the hardest race of my life, the race between life and death. I remember having a substitute taught during the day of the 14th and leaving the school at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But the next thing I knew, 3 days had passed, and I found myself in the hospital trying to hang on to my life. When I awakened, I saw my dad from here in Fargo, my twin sister who happens to be here this morning, and her husband, to celebrate my mom's 100th birthday. And anyway, my dad, my twin sister, and a doctor standing by my side. I couldn't help but wonder, well, what's going on? And the doctor told me, he said, Beth, you have been in a serious car accident. You are now admitted in an Army Medical Center. And then he went on to tell me the extent of my injuries. He said, your pelvis has been broken in 4 places. You have 10 broken ribs, a ruptured bladder, ruptured spleen, which had been removed, and a collapsed left lung, for which you're on a respirator helping me breathe. The first thought that crossed my mind when I learned all that is, thank God, I'm even alive. I later learned that I was experiencing nerve damage in my left arm, that I required the use of 20 pints of blood, and that my heart and lungs had actually stopped working at one point. I was given less than a 5% chance to live when I entered the hospital, and the doctors credit my survival to my physical fitness, which was a result of all the distance running I'd been doing, and I certainly credit the grace of God as well. Despite my nearness to death, the severity of my injuries, and the challenge of the rehab, it was in only 3 short weeks that I walked out of the hospital and I began running again in 3 months. Truly a miracle. Speaking about my running, after I graduated from college and I was no longer part of a running team, I began to set my own personal, individual running goals. My first goal was to run a marathon, which is 26.2 miles, which is also a long ways. And I ran the Seattle Marathon in November of 1979, just to know what the experience was like and to be able to say that I had run one. Well, it was enough of a positive experience for me that I was encouraged to set myself another more specific goal to run in another marathon. And this time it was to qualify for what's considered the Super Bowl of marathon, the Boston Marathon. My plan was to run in what's called the Avenue of the Giants Marathon in Northern California in early May in 1980. I was 2 weeks into my training when the accident happened, and although those plans were interrupted, at least I was alive, I had the ability, and therefore a lifetime to run. On the 2nd of May, 1982, I finally had the privilege of running in that Avenue of the Giants Marathon in California, where I hoped to run 2 years earlier. And I was amazed at how strong I felt. My mind was filled with such positive and encouraging thoughts and scripture verses that were constant reminders to me of the faith and confidence that I had in my training and preparation. I also reflected on a poster that I had in my school office here at Oak Grove that said, "The loneliness and pain of preparation, few are willing to endure it, fewer still are rewarded with victory. But aren't they all great runners? Those who win, and those who know only the loneliness and pain of preparation?" At that time, in order to qualify for the Boston Marathon, a woman of my age, which I was 24 then, had to complete the distance in a time of 3 hours and 20 minutes or less. And I finished in a time of 3 hours and 12 minutes and 20 seconds. And so I did indeed qualify for Boston. And it was nearly a year later when I had that opportunity to actually be at the Boston Marathon. It was April 18th, 1983. And I was one of the many thousands of runners in that race. And as I finally crossed the finish line, I felt such a great sense of accomplishment. Because I wanted to go to Boston for a few years and certainly had the life challenge of my surviving a car accident. And finally I had that opportunity. And although it was 2 years later than I had originally planned, it was then, in God's time. It was also then that I began to realize that sometimes our plans and God's plans may not be so different. It just may be a matter of timing. In fact, I believe that God often places the desires within us to fulfill His plan in His timing. And the last time I did run at Boston was in April of 2000. And it was shortly after I run that race that I began having trouble with the big toe on my left foot. Kind of sounds like running is hard on the body, doesn't it? But it's also valuable since it helped to save my life. But I was having trouble with this big toe, and it was diagnosed as a tiny tear in the tendon to the big toe. And it kept me from running for 6 months. I was in the boot for 5 months. And I didn't understand why a tiny tear in the tendon would keep me from running for 6 months, when as a result of a car accident, my body was so bruised and broken, and I was able to run again in 3 months. But I guess being 20 years older made a difference. Anyway, as a result of the emotional challenge it had become, not being able to run, I sought counseling to help me deal with the situation. And I discovered that seeking help is really a strength, not a weakness. And having some counseling was a great help to me. And it was through that experience that God guided me further into His plan for my life. For it was through that I was inspired to pursue my master's in counseling so that I, too, could help other women through various challenges and concerns in their lives. I began my graduate studies in the fall of 2002. 3 weeks later, in November, I was faced with a huge women's concern, for it was then that I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And despite the challenge of facing breast cancer, I continued my pursuit of my graduate studies because they gave me a forward focus and also a distraction of sorts. In December, I had surgery, and although the cancer was present only in my left breast, I chose to be very proactive and have a double mastectomy because that was the only time I wanted to have to deal with breast cancer. I had 4 rounds of chemotherapy, once every 3 weeks. And those 4 rounds I likened to running 4 laps on a track. The first round, first lap, feeling pretty good, pretty fresh, ready to take on the challenge, yet not fully knowing what to expect. Second round, second lap, I began to feel some of the effects of the chemo or the challenge of the run. Third round, third lap, was the hardest for the accumulation of the chemo or the buildup of the lactic acid that I'd been running. And yet, despite feeling worse, the fourth round or the fourth lap was easier because I knew it was the last one. I was nearing the finish line. And when the finish line is in sight, somehow it is easier to find the strength to finish well. And speaking of running while doing chemotherapy, I did just that. I certainly didn't feel up to it the first week after my treatment, but in the in-between weeks, that's exactly what I did. I just had to keep the faith and keep on running. I'm a survivor. And to celebrate, I participated in the Susan G. Komen 3-day, 60-mile walk on 2 occasions. In 2007, in honor of 5 years, and again in 2012, to celebrate 10 years. My plan, God willing, is to participate every 5 years, again, as a great way to celebrate life. In conclusion, as I look back on my life, I can see how God's will and His plan for me has unfolded. Again, I discovered that His plan and my plan may not differ. It just may be different timing. And I also know that as I look ahead and continue to seek God's will, that I can trust Him to guide me along the best pathway for my life. For He does know the plans He has for me. He knows the plans He has for each one of you. My encouragement to each of you is to think about your plans, your hopes, your goals for this year and for the years ahead. Include God in those plans. Ask Him to guide you and reveal His plan to you. And then choose to trust Him, knowing that it is the best pathway for your life. So God bless each one of you as you do seek His will and His plan for your life. Thank you.